Before the thunder rolled, before the fire split the sky, there was silence. The village of Obalumo had once been known for its balance. Tucked between gentle hills and fertile fields, it was a place where rain came when it was called, and justice came when it was needed. Elders settled disputes under the shade of the great baobab, speaking with patience and memory. Neighbors shared their harvests, knowing that one season of generosity returned in another. Children played freely in the open fields. Women sang as they ground maize. Men returned from the forests with firewood and news. There was laughter, soft, constant, woven into the rhythm of life. Obalumo was not wealthy in gold, but it was rich in peace. But peace, like a calabash, can crack quietly. It began with rumors that the former chief had died without a blessing, that his successor, Agbara, was not chosen by tradition, but by ambition. That gold had passed from hand to hand beneath the moonlight, and soon the changes came. At first they were small. The elders were no longer invited to council meetings. Then the council itself was dissolved. Public decisions became private ones. The baobab sat untouched, its shade now avoided, as if it carried shame. Agbara claimed to bring efficiency, order, strength. But strength, when it loses balance, becomes cruelty. He surrounded himself with guards, men dressed in red cloth and armed with iron rods. They walked through the markets, through the farms, through the very doorways of homes, reminding people with their silence that watching had become their duty. Taxes were raised without explanation, a grain tithe for security, a goat tax for village improvement, a water fee for maintenance, though the well had not been repaired in years. Those who paid too slowly found their pots shattered. Those who questioned too loudly found themselves taken away. Moreniki, a widow who had raised her only son with stories of courage, watched helplessly as soldiers dragged him from their home after he spoke against the tribute tax. His voice had been bold. Now his absence was louder. Baba Tayo, an old farmer with skin like bark and hands like roots, watched his family's land, passed down from his grandfather, taken by a cousin of Agbara. No explanation. Just a nod from a guard and a scribbled decree nailed to a tree. The market became silent. Women stopped singing. Children stopped laughing. The drums, once played every full moon, fell silent, their hides gathering dust. Obalumo, once a village of balance, had become a village of watching. Watching who entered, watching what was said, watching the sky, not for rain, but for signs. And in that quiet tension, some began to remember. Not just history, but power. They remembered Xangô, the Orisha of thunder, of lightning, of truth spoken through flame. The one who carried justice not as a whisper, but as a roar. The one who struck down the arrogant, who shattered the palaces of liars, who walked not with petitions, but with fire. At night, in small corners, villagers gathered, not in protest, not openly, but to remember, to hum the old songs, to drum with fingertips on the ground, to speak his name low but firm. Xangô, they whispered. See what this place has become. Day, and far above, in a sky not yet dark, not yet storming, something shifted. A current stirred in the clouds, slow, heavy, waiting. Because thunder does not rush. It waits until it is truly called. The days that followed were strange. The air in Obalumo began to feel thicker, not from heat alone, but from something unseen. It pressed against the skin like a warning. Birds flew lower than usual, their songs short and hesitant. Dogs, once loud and restless, now curled in corners, quiet, alert. The villagers noticed, but few spoke. Words had weight now, and fear was still king. Then the signs began. The first came at dawn. The village well, always faithful even in dry months, gave no water. Women lined up with their calabashes, murmuring nervously as bucket after bucket returned empty. The elders were consulted. There had been no drought. The river upstream still flowed, but the well silent. 2 nights later, a goat gave birth to twins marked with jagged, lightning-like lines along their spines. Babatayo said nothing, but his hand shook as he blessed them. A tree near the entrance of the market split down the center during the noon hour. There had been no wind, no lightning, no axe, just a single crack, like the sound of bone under pressure. The villagers gathered around it in silence, unsure whether to be afraid or relieved. Whispers returned. Not about Agbara, but about Xangô. In the evenings, Morenike sat by her fire, staring at the flame as if it might speak. She lit a candle for her son each night and placed a small carved axe beside it, a gift from her father when she was a girl. It had once been a toy. Now it felt like a relic. The guards, too, had begun to grow uneasy. They patrolled less frequently, speaking in low tones even among themselves. Some reported dreams of fire falling from the sky. Others woke with sweat clinging to their backs and the taste of ash in their mouths. Agbara noticed. He stood in the central courtyard of the palace one morning and laughed, loud and forced. Let them tremble, let them look at the sky if they dare. Xangô is myth, I am flesh, flesh rules. He raised his staff high, a rod of iron and brass crowned with polished bone, and declared that anyone found speaking the name of Orishas without permission would be punished. That night the sky turned red, not the red of sunset nor of fire, a deep, blood-hued veil that covered the village, like judgment descending. The moon disappeared, the crickets stopped singing, and the wind came from the east, where it never came from. Under the great Iroko tree, a dozen villagers knelt in silence. Morenike stood slowly. The candlelight flickered in her eyes. She spoke not to them, but to the wind. "Xangô," she whispered, "I do not ask for vengeance. I ask for truth. I ask for the scales to return to balance, for fear to fall and justice to rise." The wind lifted her wrapper slightly, coiling around her words like breath through a flute. And far above, far beyond the clouds, something heard. It began as a distant drum, then a hum, then a pressure that made the birds take flight. The clouds gathered not like a storm, but like a hand closing. And on the 7th night, Obalumo held its breath, and thunder spoke. It did not arrive like rainfall or drift in with mist. It fell. The first strike came at the edge of the village, where Agbara's guards had once burned the home of a healer accused of knowing too much. A bolt of light carved into the earth, leaving behind a glowing spiral that pulsed like a heartbeat. The second strike came near the market, where a woman had been whipped for selling food too cheaply. Her stall, untouched for months, burst into flame, but nothing else burned. The fire danced in place, contained, as if waiting, and then the third strike. It hit the palace gate. The lightning shattered the palace gate with a force that silenced even the storm. The once imposing arch, carved with symbols of Agbara's power, cracked down the middle and fell in two, each side landing with a thunderous echo that rippled through the earth. The iron studs sizzled and steamed where the lightning had touched them, still glowing orange, as if marked by the breath of the Orisha himself. The village trembled, not with fear, but with awakening. From their homes the people emerged slowly. First the children, then the mothers, then the elders who had not left their mats in days. They gathered near the square, eyes wide, hearts pounding. No one spoke. The air was still charged, humming in their bones. Inside the courtyard of the palace, chaos reigned. Guards fled, some throwing down their weapons, others falling to the ground and covering their heads, not from the sky, but from something in themselves that had broken loose. The staff that Agbara had raised like a scepter of fear now lay at his feet, split in half, burned along its spine. Agbara himself stumbled out, barefoot, robes askew, face pale with rage and disbelief. "This is trickery," he shouted. This is the work of cowards hiding behind thunder." But even as he shouted, his voice cracked. No one moved to support him. His guards avoided his eyes. His voice, once the only one allowed to echo through Obalumo, now sounded small, almost foreign. And then the people began to speak. One voice, then two, then 20. Moreniki's son was innocent. Babatayo's land was stolen in daylight. We were punished for feeding each other. You silenced the elders. You silenced us. Agbara tried to raise his hand, but another sound overtook him. Drums, not from the palace, from the earth. A low, steady rhythm began beneath their feet, not played by hands but felt in bone and belly, as if the ancestors themselves were calling through the heartbeat of the village. The wind rose. And then the final lightning struck. It did not hit the crowd. It did not fall on a person. It struck the stone lion above the throne room, a massive sculpture carved to symbolize dominance, conquest, power. The lion cracked. Its stone face, once snarling, now fractured across the eyes, and it fell. It crashed through the wall behind the throne and split the platform in half. Dust rose like smoke from judgment. No one moved. Agbara collapsed to his knees. He reached for the staff, but the metal was too hot to touch. It hissed against his skin, and he recoiled, clutching his fingers. He tried to speak, but no words came. Only silence. His silence. The silence of every unjust word he had spoken echoing back at him in a language he could no longer command. Moreniki stepped forward. She did not shout. She did not accuse. She simply said, "Xangô has spoken." Others joined her. Babatayo placed his walking staff into the ground like a pillar. The young, the old, the forgotten, they stood, not in anger, but in certainty. And then from the heavens, the clouds began to open. The rain came, soft, gentle, washing away the ash. It soaked the palace, ran along the stone paths, filled the cracked earth. It touched the hands of those who had lost. It cleansed the square. And in the heart of Obalumo, something shifted, not back to what had been, but forward, to something earned, to something just. In the days that followed, Obalumo moved like a body learning to breathe again. There was no cheering in the streets, no wild celebration. Justice, when it truly comes, leaves behind not triumph, but clarity. The people walked with reverence, not toward revenge, but toward rebuilding. The palace gates were never repaired. They stood as they had fallen, twisted, blackened, a reminder that power unchecked invites its own undoing. Agbara was no longer seen. Some said he remained locked in a room, whispering to shadows. Others believed he had fled under cover of night. Few asked, fewer cared. The village turned its gaze elsewhere. The elders returned, not as rulers, but as listeners. They began to gather again beneath the baobab tree, whose roots had witnessed both peace and oppression. Children sat at their feet, ears open wide, as the elders spoke not just of what had happened, but of why it must never happen again. Moreniki was invited to speak. She stood before the village with her back straight, eyes clear. "My son did not return," she said, "but the truth did, and truth is what feeds us now." A new council was formed, not chosen by lineage or threat, but by the people, farmers, mothers, hunters, griots. Voices that had once been dismissed now rang with wisdom. They drafted no laws that could not be sung aloud in the square. And once a year, when the winds began to shift and the sky took on that strange blue-gray hue, the one that tastes like memory, the people prepared for what they called the Day of the Fire Sky. They did not call it a festival. It was not made for joy alone. It was a night for remembering. They lit fires around the square, not to chase away darkness, but to honor what had burned to make room for light. Drums beat slow and deep, mimicking the thunder. Dancers, dressed in cloths of red and white, spun in wide circles, their arms slicing the air like Xangô's twin axes. The children carried carved wooden oshe, the sacred axe of the Orisha, not as weapons, but as symbols of balance. They were taught not only the story of Agbara's fall, but the silence that came before it, the price of forgetting, the danger of fear, and if any child ever asked, "Will Xangô come again?" the elders would smile and answer, "He never leaves." Xangô lives in the storm, yes, but also in the voice that dares to speak when others are quiet, in the hand that refuses to strike, but refuses to bow, in the fire that burns not to destroy, but to restore. And when thunder rolled over the hills in years to come, the people of Obalumo would pause, not in fear, in gratitude, because they knew justice hears, justice waits, and when it comes, it does not whisper, it roars.